They called her the $5 baker, but her buns made the company millions. Emily pushed open the bakery door at 3 a.m. Cold air wrapped around her tired body. She flicked on the lights, empty shelves, silent ovens. She stood there, staring at the darkness, breathing out a trembling sigh. Every morning was the same. She never complained, she never slowed down, her hands moved like machines, mixing flour and sugar without thinking. Each dough she kneaded burned her swollen fingers. The smell of cinnamon filled the silent room before sunrise. $5 for 12 hours. That was her life. No tips, no praise, only aching bones and unpaid debt. But there was something no one knew, something buried behind those tired eyes. The recipe she used each dawn, the same bun that made Golden Harvest famous, killed her brother. Voiceover. They called her the $5 baker, but the recipe she used destroyed her family. Emily stood at the steel counter. She poured flour into a large metal bowl. The white dust covered her apron. She rubbed her hands together to warm them. "Faster today, Emily," she whispered. "Faster than yesterday." Her voice was weak, but her eyes stayed sharp on the dough. She added yeast, sugar, and warm water. She mixed with a wooden spoon until her arms burned. The bakery was still empty. Only the old clock ticked on the cracked wall. She pushed her weight into the dough. Fold, press, turn, fold. The rhythm kept her mind quiet. She glanced at her phone. No new messages, no missed calls. She sighed and wiped sweat from her forehead with her forearm. Emily closed her eyes for a moment. She saw Mike's face smiling back at her. Her lips moved without sound. "Today, I'll make it perfect for you." Emily reached into her apron pocket. She pulled out a small photo, edges torn and stained with flour. She placed it on the metal shelf above her counter. It was Mike. In the photo, Mike smiled wide. His hair was messy. His eyes were bright with hope. He held a tray of fresh buns in his hands. Emily touched his face on the photo with her thumb. "Morning, Mike," she whispered. She closed her eyes. For a moment she was back in their old kitchen. Mike stood by the stove, scribbling notes on a yellow notepad. He mixed cinnamon and brown sugar, humming an old country song. "Try this, Em," he said, handing her a small piece of warm bun. "It's going to change everything for us." She remembered his laugh, his dreams, his promise. Emily opened her eyes, staring at his photo, but life didn't change the way he thought it would. Emily's phone buzzed on the counter. The cracked screen lit up in the dark kitchen. She wiped flour from her fingers and picked it up. A message from Brad. "Faster today! Don't make me remind you again." Her thumb hovered over the reply button. But she typed nothing. She put the phone down next to the dough bowl. The screen flickered once before turning black. She looked at the deep crack running across the glass. It split Mike's old contact photo still saved in her favorites. His smiling face was broken by the shattered screen. Emily pressed her lips together. She turned back to the dough. Her fingers dug into it, folding and pressing harder than before. She kneaded until her knuckles turned white. She didn't need Brad's reminder. She already heard his voice in her head every morning. But she wasn't working for him. She was working for Mike. Emily placed the tray of morning buns on the cooling rack. Steam rose in soft white curls. The sweet smell of cinnamon filled the quiet kitchen. She pulled out her phone. The screen was still cracked, but she didn't care. She opened Facebook. She searched for Mike's old page. His profile photo was still there. Still smiling, still alive in pixels. She snapped a quick photo of the buns. Golden brown, perfect layers. She typed a short message under the picture. "I'm still doing it your way." She pressed send. Her message posted to his empty timeline. No one would see it, no one but her. She stared at the post for a moment. The words blurred as tears filled her eyes. Emily locked her phone and slipped it back into her apron. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. "Today will be better, Mike," she whispered. "I promise." Emily had been offered a promotion last year. Shift supervisor, better pay. Shorter hours, she said no. She told them she didn't want more responsibility. But that wasn't true. The truth was simpler. She needed every extra dollar to pay off Mike's debt. His hospital bills, his funeral costs, the loans he left behind when he died alone. Emily lived in a small studio apartment. No furniture except a mattress on the floor, no TV, no couch, only one framed photo by her bed. Mike holding the first tray of morning buns he ever made. Every night before she slept, she looked at his smile. Every morning before he ate at work, she whispered to it, "I'll pay it off for you, Mike, no matter how long it takes." She folded another tray of dough. Her hands moved fast. She didn't have time to cry today. The bell above the bakery door rang softly. Emily didn't look up from her dough. A tall man walked in wearing a plain black hoodie and jeans. He carried a small backpack and looked around, unsure. His hair was neatly combed back, streaks of gray at the temples. "Hi," he said with a quiet smile. "I'm Will. First day." Emily wiped flour from her hands onto her apron. She gave him a quick nod. "The aprons are on that hook," she said, pointing without turning. Will pulled on a dark green apron. He tied it around his waist, glancing at Emily, kneading dough like a machine. She didn't say another word. She just kept folding, pressing, turning. Narration: he was the CEO of Golden Harvest. Today he was just a trainee. No suit, no title, just another worker in the kitchen he owned. But Will didn't come here to learn baking. He came to see a truth hidden from every report. Will stood next to Emily, watching her work. He grabbed a lump of dough and tried to copy her movements, his hands pressed too hard. The dough tore under his fingers. Emily glanced at him. "Not like that," she said softly. She reached out and took his hands in hers. "Gentle. Fold it over, then press with your palm, like this." She guided his hands, folding and pressing. Will looked down, concentrating on every move. Flour dust floated in the air between them. Emily's lips curved into a small smile. The first smile of her day. She let go of his hands and folded the dough herself with practiced grace. "You'll get it," she said. Her voice was calm, almost kind. Will watched her silently. He saw the deep lines under her eyes, the way her shoulders curved forward in exhaustion. Narration: for the first time she smiled, but it wasn't happiness. It was muscle memory from a life she no longer lived. The back door swung open hard. Cold morning air rushed in. Brad walked in, his suit jacket flapping behind him. He carried a steaming coffee cup and a phone pressed to his ear. His eyes scanned the kitchen and landed on Emily. He ended his call without saying goodbye. "Emily," he barked, "you're behind again." Emily didn't look up. Her hands kept folding the dough. "I'm on schedule," she said quietly. Brad stepped closer. His polished shoes stopped inches from her flour-covered sneakers. "Customers are lining up already. Move faster." Will watched from the sink. He rinsed his hands slowly, eyes fixed on Brad's sharp tone. Emily nodded once. She pressed harder into the dough. Her wrists trembled under the weight. Brad turned away, already dialing another number. His voice echoed through the kitchen. "Worthless staff," he muttered under his breath. Narration: Will clenched his jaw. He had seen enough for one morning, but this was only the beginning. Flashback. Mike stood in a small office holding a stack of papers. His hands shook slightly as he spoke. "Brad, I finished the recipe for the new Morning Bun," he said softly. "I think it will boost sales. I tested it for weeks." Brad leaned back in his leather chair. He glanced at the papers, bored. Then he grabbed them from Mike's hands. "This?" Brad scoffed. "Cheap cinnamon rolls with a twist? You call this innovation?" Mike swallowed hard. He opened his mouth to reply, but no words came out. Brad stood up. He crumpled the top page and ripped it in half. The tearing sound had echoed in the quiet office. "Get out," Brad said coldly. "We don't pay you to waste time." Mike picked up the torn pieces from the floor. His eyes burned, but he didn't cry. Narration: in that moment, something inside Mike broke. But his recipe wasn't gone. Brad kept a copy. Mike stood outside the bakery window. His hands were stuffed into the pockets of his worn jacket. Cold wind whipped against his face, but he didn't move. Inside, customers lined up. The glass display case was full of fresh morning buns, golden brown, perfect layers of cinnamon sugar. A sign above them read, "Introducing our new signature morning bun." Mike read the words over and over. His chest felt tight. He watched as a woman bought 2 buns and smiled at the cashier. She took a bite right there by the door. "Wow," she said, laughing. "This is the best thing they've ever made." Mike pressed his forehead against the cold glass. He felt his breath fog up the window. Narration: they called it new, they called it theirs. But it was his. In that moment, Mike felt everything he believed in slip away. The room was silent when Emily walked in. Only the ceiling fan hummed above her head. She called his name once. "Mike?" No answer. Her eyes fell on his shoes. They lay neatly by the wall. Next to them was his phone, screen black. She looked up. Her breath caught in her chest. Mike hung from the ceiling beam. His head tilted forward. His hair covered his eyes. Emily fell to her knees. Her hand shook as she reached for his leg. "Mike, please, wake up," she whispered. Her tears fell onto the dusty floor. She pressed her forehead against his jeans and sobbed. Narration: he died thinking he was nothing. He died believing his work had no worth. Emily stayed there for hours, holding his leg, rocking back and forth. She didn't care if the sun rose or set. She only wanted him to breathe again. Will stood next to Emily at the counter. He watched her fold dough with quiet focus. He cleared his throat softly. "Where did you learn this recipe?" he asked. Emily didn't look up. Her hands kept moving, pressing and turning. She paused for a second and wiped sweat from her brow. "My brother," she said. "Mike." Will waited, but she didn't say more. He leaned closer. "Did he work here too?" he asked. Emily nodded slowly. "He created this bun," she whispered. "Tested it for weeks. Perfected every layer." Her voice cracked. "But they took it from him." Will frowned. "Took it?" Emily finally looked at him. Her eyes were red but dry. "He died thinking it was worthless," she said softly. They made millions. He died owing thousands." She turned back to her dough without another word. Narration. Will felt a heaviness in his chest, but he still didn't know the full truth. Will sat alone in his car during lunch break. He unlocked his tablet and opened the latest sales report. His eyes scanned the top line. Morning Bun, annual revenue, 20 $480,000. He exhaled slowly. $20 million. For a single product. For a recipe made by a man who died in debt. He scrolled further. The bun accounted for nearly 40% of the bakery's profits that year. Customer reviews called it life-changing. Food bloggers wrote articles praising its unique flavor. Will rubbed his forehead. He thought of Emily's tired eyes. He thought of Mike's name, missing from every report. Narration. They built their success on his creation, but no one knew his story. No one even remembered his name. Will closed his tablet and stared out the window. His chest tightened with anger. He knew then what he needed to do. The bakery was busy. Customers lined up, chatting and scrolling their phones. Emily moved quickly behind the counter. She boxed pastries and brewed coffee with quiet focus. Brad walked in, checking his watch. He frowned when he saw Emily. "Why is this line so long?" he snapped. "Move faster? Or should I hire someone half your age to replace you?" Emily froze for a second. Her hands trembled as she placed a bun into a paper bag. "I'm doing my best," she whispered. Brad leaned closer, his voice sharp. "Your best isn't good enough. Stop dragging this place down." Customers glanced away, pretending not to hear, but Will saw everything. He stood near the coffee machines, wiping a counter. His jaw tightened. His fists curled so hard his knuckles turned white. Narration. He had seen enough. This wasn't leadership. This was cruelty. And Will knew it was time to act. Will stepped outside into the cold morning air. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number quickly. "Jessica," he said, voice low but firm. "Yes, Mr. Thompson?" His assistant answered. "I need the full file on the Morning Bun," he said. "Recipe drafts, original development notes, internal emails, sales data, everything." There was a pause on the line. "Everything, sir?" "Yes," he said, tightening his grip on the phone. "And I need it in 1 hour. No excuses." He ended the call without waiting for a reply. He slipped his phone back into his pocket and looked through the bakery window. Emily was wiping the counter. Her shoulders were hunched. Brad stood behind her, pointing at a stack of boxes, barking orders. Narration. Will felt anger boil in his chest. He had trusted his team. He thought his company stood for honesty. But today proved him wrong, and he would find out the truth before the sun set. Emily's vision blurred as she packed the last tray of buns. Her hands felt numb. The room spun around her. She grabbed the counter to steady herself. Brad's voice shouted from behind, "Hurry up, Emily! Customers are waiting!" She tried to reply, but her lips wouldn't move. Black spots clouded her eyes. Her knees buckled. Will saw her collapse. He dropped the towel in his hands and ran forward. He caught her just before she hit the floor. "Emily?" he said softly, shaking her shoulder. She didn't respond. Her head rested against his chest, her skin cold with sweat. He scooped her up in his arms. The bakery staff stared as he carried her to the back room. He laid her down on a small couch and covered her with his jacket. He brushed hair from her face. Narration. She had worked herself to the edge. For them, for her brother, and no one even noticed she was breaking. Emily opened her eyes slowly. The ceiling above her was blurry. She blinked until the light came into focus. She felt something warm draped over her, Will's black jacket. She turned her head and saw him sitting on a chair nearby. His elbows rested on his knees. His hands were clasped tight. His eyes stared at the floor, heavy with thought. "Will?" she whispered. His head snapped up. Relief washed over his face. "You're awake," he said softly. She tried to sit up, but dizziness pulled her back down. "Don't," he said quickly. Just rest a bit longer." Emily closed her eyes again. Her voice was barely a breath. "I'm sorry. For causing trouble." Will shook his head. No, he whispered. You have nothing to be sorry for. Narration. He saw her now, not as staff, not as a number on payroll, but as a person broken by his company's success. Will sat in his office later that day. The blinds were half closed. Light cut across his desk in thin lines. His laptop screen glowed in front of him. He opened the folder Jessica had sent. Hundreds of files, recipes, reports, emails. He scrolled until one subject line caught his eye. Morning Bun final recipe. Request for credit. He clicked it open. It was from Mike Carter. Hi, Brad, the email read. I finished the recipe you asked for. If you like it, could you please list me as creator in the team notes? It would really help me keep my job. Will felt his chest tighten. Mike's words were polite, hopeful, desperate. He read it again, then again. There was no reply. Brad had never answered. Narration. Mike didn't want money. He only wanted his name beside his work. But even that was too much for them to give. Will sat in his car in the empty parking lot. Rain tapped softly against the windshield. He held Mike's file in his lap. Pages of recipes, notes in careful handwriting. His eyes blurred as he read the name again. Michael Carter. Tears slipped down his cheeks. He wiped them away quickly, but they kept coming. He pressed his forehead against the steering wheel and exhaled shakily. Narration. Years ago, Mike was a bright young intern. He shadowed Will in the test kitchen. He asked questions no one else thought to ask. He stayed late to clean every counter spotless. Will used to tell others, and that kid's going to change this company one day. But Will left R&D to become CEO, and somewhere along the way, he forgot about Mike. He opened the file again. His tears fell into Mike's name. Will whispered into the empty car, I'm so sorry, kid. Will sat up straight in his seat. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. The rain outside fell harder, but his mind was clear now. He picked up his phone and dialed quickly. Jessica, he said. His voice was steady, calm. Yes, Mr. Thompson, she replied. I want a company-wide meeting in, he said. Today. There was a pause. Today, sir, should I schedule for later this week? No, he said firmly. Today, in 1 hour. Understood, she replied quietly. Will ended the call and stared at the dark sky ahead. His reflection looked back at him in the glass. Older, tired, heavy with guilt. Narration. For years he thought leading meant building profit. But today he saw what true leadership required. It was time to stand up. It was time to make things right. He took a deep breath. His hand tightened around Mike's file. And he knew what he had to do next. The conference room buzzed with quiet chatter. Managers checked their watches, wondering why the meeting was called so suddenly. The door opened. Everyone turned. Will walked in wearing a dark green bakery apron over his pressed shirt. Flour stains still marked the front. His hair was slightly messy from the morning shift. People whispered to each other. No one had ever seen the CEO like this. He didn't sit at the head of the table. Instead, he stood near the screen, holding a thick folder against his chest. Thank you for coming, he said. His voice was calm, but carried an edge no one missed. He looked around the room, at every face. At Brad, sitting with his arms crossed, looking annoyed. Narration. Today, Will wasn't here as their boss. He was here as a man who saw the truth with his own eyes, and he was about to show them what leadership really meant. Will set the folder down and reached into a paper bag. He pulled out a tray of fresh morning buns. Steam still rose from their golden tops. He placed the tray gently in the center of the table. The sweet smell of cinnamon and sugar filled the room. Everyone stared in silence. Will looked up and locked eyes with Brad. Brad shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Do you know what this is? Will asked. His voice was calm, almost too calm. Brad cleared his throat. It's our best-selling product, he said. Morning Bun. The customers love it. Will nodded slowly. Yes, $20 million in revenue last year. He paused. But do you know who created it? Brad opened his mouth, then closed it again. He looked away. Narration. Will's eyes didn't leave Brad. For the first time in years, Brad looked small. The truth was about to come out, and no one in that room would forget it. Will picked up the folder and pulled out a printed email. He held it up for everyone to see. This is from 6 years ago, he said quietly, from a young baker named Mike Carter. Brad shifted in his chair, eyes narrowing. Will read aloud. Hi, Brad. I finished the recipe for the morning bun you asked for. If you like it, could you please list me as the creator in the team notes? It would really help me keep my job. Silence filled the room. No one moved. No one breathed. Will looked up from the paper. His eyes locked on Brad. There was no reply to this email, he said. Instead, Mike Carter was let go, and his recipe became the foundation of this company's success. Brad opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Narration. The truth hung heavy in the air. The bun that built their brand came from a man they chose to erase. Will placed the email down on the table. He looked around at every person in the room. His eyes were clear, steady. "This ends today," he said quietly. He took a deep breath. "From this moment on, Emily Carter will have all of her brother's debts cleared by this company." Gasps filled the room. People whispered to each other. Will continued. "She will also be appointed as head of pastry research and development, effective immediately." Brad's mouth dropped open. He shook his head in disbelief. "But she's just a baker." Will raised his hand to silence him. "She is the only person here who knows what true dedication looks like," he said firmly. "She carried her brother's legacy while this company profited off his work." Narration. For the first time, Emily's name was spoken with respect, not as a worker, but as the woman who saved their brand and carried its truth alone. Will turned to Brad. Silence fell across the room. No one moved. "Brad Morgan," Will said firmly. His voice was calm but carried steel. Brad shifted in his seat, his face pale. "Yes, sir?" Will looked him straight in the eyes. "You are fired. Effective immediately." Brad's mouth fell open. He stood up quickly. "You can't do this," he said, his voice shaking. I built this product. I built this company." Will shook his head slowly. "No," he said quietly. "Mike Carter built this. Emily carried it. You just took it." Brad looked around the room, searching for support. But no one spoke. No one met his eyes. "Security will escort you out," Will added. Narration. Brad opened his mouth to argue again, but closed it. For the first time, he had no power here. The man who stole everything, left with nothing. Will looked around the silent room. His voice was calm, but heavy with emotion. "There is one more thing," he said. He picked up Mike's file from the table and held it in both hands. "Starting today, Golden Harvest will create a fund to protect our employees' creations," he continued. "It will be named the Mike Carter Memorial Fund." Murmurs spread through the room. Eyes widened in surprise. "This fund will ensure every recipe, every idea, and every product is credited to its true creator," Will said. "No one will ever be forgotten again." He paused, taking a deep breath. "It's time we stand for what we say we believe in. This company was built by people like Mike. They deserve our respect." Narration. For the first time, Mike's name wasn't hidden in an old email. It was spoken with honor. And it would live on in every bun they baked. Emily sat alone on a bench outside the bakery. Morning sun warmed her tired face. She held her phone with trembling hands. She scrolled to her mother's number and pressed call. It rang twice before a weak voice answered. "Emily, are you okay?" Emily tried to speak, but her voice broke. Tears rolled down her cheeks. She covered her mouth to muffle her sobs. "Em?" her mother asked softly. "What happened, sweetheart?" Emily wiped her tears and took a shaky breath. "Mom, they cleared Mike's debt," she whispered. "And they gave me his job, head of pastry development." Silence on the line. Then a quiet sound. Her mother was crying too, but this time they were light tears of relief. "I'm so proud of you," her mother whispered, voice breaking. And he would be too. Narration. For the first time in years, their family felt peace, and Emily felt her brother's dream come alive again. The morning rush had begun. Emily stood behind the counter wearing her new name badge. Head of pastry R&D, she watched as customers lined up outside the glass door. Their eyes widened as they read the new sign above the pastry case. Mike's Morning Bun, inspired by Mike Carter. The letters were bold and clean against the white background. Next to it sat a small framed photo of Mike, flour dust on his cheek, smiling proudly. An elderly man leaned closer to read the sign. He nodded slowly and turned to his wife. "That's the young man who created it," he said softly. "He finally got his name on it." Emily blinked away tears. She placed fresh trays of buns onto the shelf. Each golden swirl felt lighter in her hands today. Narration. The line stretched out the door. But for Emily, this wasn't about sales anymore. It was about finally telling the world who Mike truly was. She woke up every morning before the sun. She worked 12 hours for $5. She carried her brother's debt alone. All while the company earned millions from his creation. Today his name stands above every tray of morning buns. Today his story is no longer hidden. Emily didn't ask for power. She didn't ask for praise. She only wanted him to be remembered. Leadership isn't about titles or profit. It's about doing what is right, even when no one is watching. So now ask yourself, If you were the CEO, what would you have done? Would you stay silent to protect yourself, or stand up for those who built your success? Comment justice if you believe that people who create value deserve to be remembered. Because behind every great product, there is a name, there's a dream, and there's a story that should never be erased.